In this video, I'm going to look at SAP Enable Now's automated translation capabilities. This allows you to automatically translate all of the default template texts. It's not going to translate any of your custom texts, anything that you've entered yourself. The only way to get that done is to use the translation hub, which is being added in the 2011 release. I've got a blog post over on enablenowexpert.com explaining how that works. But for now, let's look at the existing functionality and see how that works. So I've got a structure here. I've got a group and I've got a couple of simulations and a book page in it. I want to translate all of that, say, into French and German. So let's look at how we do that. First of all, let's look at what's inside this and what may be translated, what may not. So, simple simulation in here. I've got an explanation macro in here for my explanation bubble. All of this is custom text, okay? This is always going to require manual translation, and we'll get into how that's done towards the end of this video. But all of this stuff in here is default template text that has been captured during recording, and that will be translated automatically, generally, unless you do something to it, which we'll look at now. So this is standard template text. I really don't like the way this is. VA03 is now entered into the transaction box. Always seems a bit clunky to me. But before I change any of this, let's go and look at a couple of fields down here. Under demo bubble, there's a field called translate manually, and it's currently not selected. Under practice bubble, there's also one, translate manually, not selected. Now, let's look at this. Say I don't like this text and I want to change it to something else. So I go into here and I will say, for example, so a fairly simple change in here. Nothing major, but I like the wording a little bit better. So watch what happens as soon as I change this text here. If I now go down and look at the demo text, or the demo bubble here that's using that demo text, translate manually has now been selected. Basically what that means is you have changed something on the template text, so now I can't automatically translate it because I don't know what you've changed it to. Okay, so as soon as you make any change to that text, that checkbox is going to be selected automatically. For example, if I go into practice text and say I want this in red because I like to draw users' attention to it. So let me put that in red. As soon as I do that, under practice bubble, now translate manually is selected. Even though I've not changed any of the real substance of it, I've not changed the text itself, all I've changed is the color. As soon as I've done that, it will basically say, okay, I can't translate this text automatically. And what we'll see in a minute is basically the way this works, and this is an important field to pay attention to. Whenever this is selected, SAP Enable Now is going to take that text and put that into the exported translation file that you have to send off to a translator or someone else in your company who knows this language for them to physically go and change it. If that checkbox is not selected for any of these things, like this one here, this text here, it will absolutely come up with the local language translated text because it's in the template. So, bearing that in mind, say I go through here and I say, look, all I've done is put it in red. I'm not really going to pay a translation company to translate these 6 words for me just because one of them is now in red. I can fix that up on the back end myself. So what I can do is I can come into here and I can deselect this checkbox. It's not going to affect any of my changes here, but the effect it will have is that this text will now not be, quote, flagged for manual translation and will not be put in that export file, and instead SAP Enable Now will use the default template text. So again, an important field to bear in mind. So to summarize, this one here, the demo text, because we've changed it, we're now going to have to translate it manually. This one, the practice text, even though we've changed it, we didn't really change the wording, so I'm going to deselect that box, which means that it will be translated automatically. So let me save those changes there. Now, just to complete the story for you, where does it get the template texts? Under Resources, Recording Dictionaries, whichever one is in bold, that's the default one, that's what it's going to use. And if I open this, and then try and find that particular text, which I happen to know is called this one here, you can see that this text here, square brackets input, this is the input text. This basically is like a placeholder, is now entered in the transaction box. And SAP Enable Now will always call the command field or the transaction code field or whatever you call it, the transaction box. If you ever wanted to change it, it would be there. And the translations into different languages, if I go into German here and then basically find exactly the same thing down here, here's with the German text. Now, because we've changed it, it's not going to bring that in. Okay, so that's how that works. I'm not going to make any changes to that. I'll just close it down. I hadn't checked it out anyway. But that's where those texts come from. So let's go and translate this stuff now. So I'm going to do it at this level, at the group level, because I want all three of these to be translated. Bearing in mind that book pages are completely custom text. There's obviously no template text for a book page because it's all only text that you type in. But any text that's in a text box or text in a shape or whatever else will get brought in. So let's translate that. I'm going to go to Tools, Localization, Automated Translation All. This was brought in a few releases back. Before this, you'd basically have to take a copy of everything yourself, set the language code yourself. This basically does that. This is going to translate just the template text. So I go to Automated Translation All and it says, which languages do you want? And I'm going to say, for example, I want German as spoken in Germany and I want French as spoken in France. Control click to hold to select multiple ones and click OK. And let's see what that does for us. Okay, and we're done. So what that has done for us is basically created a new folder, or a new group, sorry, at the same level as the one I currently had selected. And that now has all of this content in the selected language. Now note that the titles are not in that language. Again, that is basically custom text. That is something that we typed in. So that is something we're going to have to fix ourselves, along with all of this here. All it's really done is it's taken a full copy of that whole folder and it's gone through, and for all of the objects it's set the language code to French, and in this case to German. So let's go and look inside one of these and see what that's given us. So here, as I said before, any explanations it cannot translate because that's custom text. Okay, but on here you can see this is one that I changed myself, so the translate manually checkbox was selected, which means I need to manually translate it, and this text has not been changed. However, this text, the practice text, because I did not have that checkbox selected, and I believe it's kept our selections here. So because translate manually was not selected, it's basically gone and got that template text for us. And it's effectively reset the minor change I made to here to set this in red. Okay, it's basically put it back to black because that's what the template tells it to do. So it's ignored the fact that I made any changes specifically because that translate manually checkbox was not selected. So if that checkbox is not selected, it says, hey, I'm just going to go and get the template text for this and we're all good. And then all the way through the rest of this, all of this is translated into German. Now, so this is basically halfway through. If you have not changed any of the text boxes or any of the bubbles and you've only used the template text, you're more or less finished at this point. Not quite though, because you can see that we've still got in here, for example, the step name, because that's something we typed in, not something that came from the template. That's in the original language. We've got obviously our explanations in the original language, and we've got our screen names in the original language. And for example, this, klicken Sie auf Enter. Enter is obviously an English word, and that's coming from the object name here. So it's not translating the object names because SAP Enable Now doesn't know whether you're also going to change the screens out and have, in this case, German screens with German buttons. So it doesn't know at that point, so it's going to leave those exactly the way they are, which ties up with how the system is, because the system's still in English, in the original language. Okay, so far so good. So now the next thing that you need to do is get all of that custom text translated. This is where you're going to need to involve an external translation company, or find someone who knows the language themselves, or maybe you do and you can just go and overtype it yourself. But you'll probably find it easier doing it this way anyway. So I'm going to take this whole group here, I'm going to go back to Tools, Localization, and here I'm going to select Export Translation File. What I want to do is create a file that I can send to whoever's doing this translation that's got all of those little bits of custom text in them, so they can translate just that. If you've got the translator within your company, you could give them access to this and say, hey, just go in and edit and overtype stuff, but honestly this will be easier. So let me select Export Translation File. There's a couple of formats I can use. XLIF is used by basically machine translation things. So if you're working with a translation company and the first thing they do is take your input and just push it through their automatic translation package, then they might want an XLIF file. I'm going to use Microsoft Word because we can see what's in that. Under Structure, you can select everything in your whole library. You can select a particular group, which is subtree and everything below it, or current object, which will only do what you've got selected. So here I want subtree. Export as one file means even though we have got effectively 4 objects here, 1 group, 2 simulations, 1 book page, it's going to put them all in a single Word document or XLIF document if you selected that. If I deselect this, I'll get 1 Word document for each of those objects, which if you're going to parse out this stuff to multiple translators, then excuse me, then that's a good thing to do. But generally, if it's all going to the same place, leave it in 1 file. Now, only object properties. If you select this, it will only bring in all of these properties here. Okay? It will only do anything that you effectively see in the work area view down here. So it will bring in the short description, the name, the description, any tags, keywords, that kind of stuff. That's generally not what you want to do, so that's selected here. Include control names. Now, remember I said that it's not got all of the button names, the field names, the step names, and the screen titles. They're all referred to collectively as control names. So if you also want those translating, then you need to have this selected, and that will go to the translation company again, and it will literally have a text place for enter, and they will need to change that to entree in French or whatever it is in German. I'm going to leave that selected here because I want to show you how that works. But generally, unless you're changing the screens as well to show the local language screens, you'll probably still want to leave that the way it is so it accurately reflects the system. You don't want it to say appuyez sur le entrée button, and then when they look for the entrée button, it's actually written on the screen as enter. So be careful with this one. This, include generated project texts. Generated project text, that's the template texts. So by default, you do not want to include those. Basically what this is saying is you've done your automatic translation of the template text and it's brought in those local language texts. If you want to include those anyway so that your translation company or translator can maybe tweak them a bit, then select this and it will bring in those as well. Okay, but generally if you've just accepted the template translations, then that's good enough and you don't need to select this. Last couple of ones, target folders where you want it to put the file, not super important as long as you remember where it is. And then export objects with status. If you're using the object statuses and you for example, when something's been finalized, you set it to published or ready for translation or some other status that you know, then you can basically set this to say only pull in ones that have a specific status. And then change status of exported objects so you can get it to say, if you've got a status of say ready for translation and you only pull in those, you can get all of those to automatically change to, for example, sent for translation. Okay, so you always know where things are. Super useful if you're using workflow. We're not, so I'm going to ignore those. Okay, so now let's just click OK and see what that gives us. Okay, that's done. So I'm going to open this. It's going to open in Word for me. Okay, so here's the Word document that's been created for us. This is what you would pass to your translator or translation company. Now, very important that you tell them that any text that is in red in these boxes, they must not change at all. This basically tells SAP Enable Now where to put the text when it comes back in. In this case, this is the group, that's the ID of the group, and this is the title of that group, or the name of that group, okay, which is sales order processing. Short descriptions blank in this case for that group, descriptions blank, there's no keywords. Then we're on to our project. This is the name of the project, this is a short description, long description, and so on. So this file you need to send to your translation company and get them to translate that text, all of the black text, and then send it straight back to you. Okay? Oh, one more thing I'll point out while we're in here. This is my custom text, okay, where I changed the demo text to say, previously this said something like transaction code XYX is now entered into the transaction box, and I changed it because I didn't like it. This is what I've got instead. Again, instructions to your translator, do not touch this. Anything inside the square brackets, that again is the PH placeholder. It's a text placeholder and is the text, basically the text object name in here. So tell the translator anything that's like that, do not touch. Okay, everything else you can. And you'll notice that this says this is started by entering whatever. We've got in here enter. This is our field name for the enter button. And again, remember we selected that include objects as well. That's what it's brought in here. This is actually the screen name, and then this is the field name, and this is another field name. So these are all brought in because we said that we wanted to bring in all of the object names as well. Okay, so that's why we're here. You'll also notice that where I've got this, which is the demonstration bubble explanation underscore D, there is no explanation underscore P for the practice mode, because remember I deselected that box that said translate the practice mode text manually, so it basically gave us the automatic translation of that which we saw. Okay, so that's why you don't have that in here. If you did select that checkbox that said include all of the generated text as well, I'd also have in here explanation underscore D, and I would see the translated text in here, the German text in here. Okay, so let's say we've sent this to our translation company and then it comes back with some text in it. I'm just going to copy and paste some stuff from Google Translate, so don't hate on me if it's wrong, and I'll just put some text in there so we can see what it does. Okay, so I've just got some translated text for the first page in here just to show how this works. So we've got our German text in here all the way down. Anything that was in English is now in German. I will point out that here the translation company has quite happily left this stuff unchanged in square brackets, and any formatting like bold or italics they've also left for us. So that's all good. So now all we need to do, and I'll forget about everything else, just pretend that's been translated as well. So I'm going to save this, exit from it, back into SAP Enable Now. Now that had in it all of these objects. Remember again, we selected that single file option. So now I can import that same file again. So I go straight back to Tools, Localization, Import Translation File, and select the file, which was the one we just looked at. And I said I put it under here, Translate Doc, that's from today. That's the correct document in here. So I'm going to select that, open it. I'm not going to select duplicate objects. This is important. Make sure that is not selected. We already have the objects duplicated from the original English version. They were duplicated into French and into German. So they've already been duplicated. Important point, some people forget this and then they get hung up because it's saying, well, what's the target language? It's already in German. So again, make sure that's not selected. It hides those options there. Because again, we've already done that copy. That's what that new menu option does for us. So I'm going to click OK, and we'll let it pull all of that text into where it needs to. And that's it done. That may take a few minutes, especially if you've got a lot of content in there and you don't really get much in the way of a progress bar or anything. Just have patience. It is doing something. Okay, just wait it out. So let's see what that's done for us now. Now you can see that it has brought in the translated text for our group name. We didn't have anything else in here. For our simulation, it's brought that in, the name of it, the short description and the description, all of which we changed. If I go into here to see what's changed, I can see that my explanation frame has all been translated here, and all of the standard template text is still all in there okay. Here I've got my input text. This is where I entered my custom text, and this was the default text as well. However, I do notice that for some reason it has left this text in here instead of resubstituting the placeholder. I don't know if that's something wrong that I did or something the translation company did wrong, but I know that that is basically a placeholder for the text that we entered. I can see that because it says here text. So I'm going to just insert that myself, and then we're back to where we should be with this. Okay, and everything else looks good. Again, that may have been something I did, but it does show that you should always go through and check these things on the way through. Okay, and that's it. So that just shows us how easy it is to get stuff translated. Again, it's not too hard. You're going through tools, localization, automated translation all, and then per language, you're going to export the translation file, import the translation file once it's been translated, and that's it, and you're good to go. Just don't forget to finish editing and check it back into the server. Okay, hope you found that useful. Thanks for watching.